an answer to your challenge, grouping the amendments into categories. But there's one we're struggling with.
Which one?
Amendments 12, 20, 22, and 25 seem related to elections and the president, so we created two small groups for those.
Tell me your rationale.
Well, 12 and 23 seem to deal with electing a president. 22 and 25 seem to be about a president who's already in office, but we weren't sure.
I like your logic for grouping those together. Let's use those to go through them.
Any help you can give us on telling them apart?
Sure. Let's look at the 12th Amendment. This amendment was a result of the election of 1800. Under the presidential election system established in Article 2 of the Constitution, each elector of the Electoral College voted 2 times, but was not required to state for whom the elector was voting for president and for whom the elector was voting for vice president. The framers' thinking was that the electors, in the absence of political parties, would simply cast their votes for the best man. The individual who received a majority of the electoral votes became president, and the individual who received the second largest number of electoral votes automatically became vice president.
Sounds simple enough.
It was, until the election of 1800, when we had 2 political parties. This led to a tie in the electoral vote between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, both members of the Democratic-Republican Party. This tie was ultimately decided by the U.S. House of Representatives. To prevent further ties, the 12th Amendment provided that each elector would vote once for president and cast a second vote for vice president.
Okay, that's pretty confusing. How would I tell that amendment from the others?
Just remember, put the 1 and 2 together and you get 12. The 12th Amendment provides for 1 vote for president and a second vote for vice president.
That helps. Do you have a hint for the 20th?
Here's one. The 20th Amendment provides for the terms of the president and vice president to end at noon on the 20th day of January, when their successor's term begins. This means the new president is sworn into office on January 20th, 20th, and 20th. See how simple that is?
Pretty cool. But why would we need that amendment? Didn't the Constitution already have the date for swearing in a new president?
No. The Constitution, as adopted in 1787, did not set a date for the election of the president, vice president, U.S. senators, or U.S. representatives, nor a date for the beginning of their terms. Early in the nation's history, Congress by law set these dates. The first Tuesday after the first Monday in November as the date for all national elections, and the first Wednesday in March as the date when the terms of the president, vice president, and members of both chambers of Congress would begin. As a result, although elected in November, newly elected officials did not take office until the following March, and those defeated in November correspondingly did not leave office until March, often called the lame duck amendment. The 20th Amendment shortens the time that so-called lame duck presidents, vice presidents, and legislators, that is, those defeated in November, remain in office.
Why would they care about a lame duck period?
Without the amendment, the lame duck president would be able to continue to make governing decisions for months, even though he or she had been defeated in the bid for re-election.
So our other grouping had to do with once the president is already in office. We saw that the 22nd Amendment limited the number of terms that a president can serve. One question we had was, why didn't the people who wrote the Constitution limit the number of terms a president could serve? Especially after being under the thumb of the king, we thought the limitation of terms would have been a key point.
The framers felt that providing a term itself would serve as a limit, since the incumbent would have to be chosen again in 4 years. For most of our history, the precedent set by George Washington not to seek a third term, even though he could have done so, stood. Washington's precedent lasted until 1940 when Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt won a third term as president, and then in 1944 won a fourth term.
So they changed it and said that a person can only be president for a max of 8 years.
Actually, it's a total of 10 years.
That doesn't add up. 2 terms of 4 years equals 8.
Your math is correct. But the 22nd limits a vice president who serves 1 day more than 2 years of another president's first term to 1 full 4-year term for a total of 6 years and 1 day as president. Correspondingly, if a vice president serves less than 2 years of another president's term, then that individual can, if elected, serve 2 full terms of his or her own, with an absolute maximum as president of 10 years.
Okay, that makes sense. The last one in our grouping was the 25th Amendment.
That amendment has to do with presidential disability and a vacancy in the office of the vice president. Based on the language of Article 2, Section 1, everyone understood that the vice president became president on the death of the president or his resignation or removal from office.
We've known that for a long time. The vice president becomes president if the president dies in office.
But did you consider what happens when the vice president becomes president? Who is the new vice president?
Any help you can give us?
Sure. It wasn't until President John Kennedy's assassination in 1963 that many considered the need for a constitutional amendment to address the issues left unanswered by Article 2. Section 1 concerns the removal of the president from office or his death or resignation, and provides that the vice president becomes president. Section 2 provides that if there is a vacancy in the office of vice president, the president appoints a new vice president with approval by a majority vote of both houses of Congress.
So we get a new vice president when Congress approves them? Has it ever happened?
Twice. In 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned as vice president, and President Richard Nixon appointed longtime U.S. Representative Gerald Ford to be the new vice president. Vice President Ford easily won approval by both houses of Congress. In 1974, when President Nixon became the first president in history forced to resign the presidency rather than face impeachment charges, Vice President Ford became President Ford, and then appointed Nelson Rockefeller to succeed himself as vice president.
What if a president becomes, incapacitated?
Good question. The amendment also addressed situations where the president knows ahead of time that he or she is going to be disabled.
How would a person know that?
Well, let's say a president is going to have surgery. They will be put under anesthesia and won't be able to carry out their presidential duties at that time.
So what happens?
The president communicates in writing to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House that he or she is going to be disabled. The vice president becomes acting president until the president communicates in writing to the same 2 officials that he or she has recovered.
Got it. But what happens if something happens to the president and they can't write a letter?
I like it. You're digging in. The amendment addresses situations where the president can't communicate his or her disability, or if there is disagreement about the disability. The vice president becomes acting president if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet communicate in writing to the president pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House their decision that the president is unable to perform the duties of the office. When the president communicates in writing to the same 2 officials that he or she has recovered, the president resumes the office. The amendment also addresses the process when there is disagreement about the president's ability to remain in office, but this has never been used.
What an ordeal! By the way, we did have one more amendment that could go with these groupings, but you went over it when you were explaining how amendments are added to the Constitution.
Which one was that?
The one about Congress getting a pay increase.
The 27th.
We thought it'd go in this section because it had to do with people being in office, but then decided to leave it out because the 12th, 20th, 22nd, and 25th were really more about the president.
I can see how you might add it here, if you consider that all of these amendments have to do with the legislative and executive branches of government. The 27th Amendment says that if the members of Congress vote to give themselves a pay raise, they have to wait 2 years and face the voters one more time before receiving the raise. Why didn't you leave it in this grouping?
We thought about it, but then we remembered that the 27th was proposed by James Madison in 1789, but not approved until 1992, so we thought it fit in better with the background on the Bill of Rights. Good amendments take time.
You all did great on this assignment. It really took some thinking.
Thanks, but do us a favor. Don't give us something like this again.